Good morning, everyone, especially to my professor, my ever beautiful and young professor, Dr. Arbaya Etzbukia. So, my name is Rashid B. Bandao. So, I'm the partner of Ma'am Baragir to report about the continuation of the passive voice under the chapter 18. So, we will start at the past participles, adjectives, or passive. Okay, so most of the time, the distinction between a past participle functioning as a passive verb and one serving as an adjective will be obvious. However, the distinction is not always clear cut. So, when we talk about clear cut, it pertains to the direct stated sentence or it automatically understood well. Okay, so we have here three sample sentences in which we can choose whether it is adjective or a passive. So first sentence we have the windows were broken. Okay, so the past participle broken could be regarded as either adjectival or passive. Why? It is because of the used participle broken. Okay, and we can also observe the second sentence that says the house was a mess, the paint work was peeling, and the windows were broken. Okay, so when we talk about the windows were broken there, it becomes a part. It becomes an adjective or adjectival. Why? It is because it modifies the windows. What happened to the window? It was broken. So that is accordingly to the structure that has been given in this sentence. So we have also the third sentence. The windows were broken by the force of the explosion. So as you can see, we observe that we already used the uh, word by there, in which it explains that the sentence is using the passive voice. Okay, so the participle broken there is the passive. Okay, before we proceed to these sentences or examples, let's discuss first the first three sentences. Okay, so in the first interpretation, the past participle is descriptive or stative and thus adjectival. So we cannot truly identify it as a passive or adjectival because of its structure also, and thus adjectival. So in the second, the past participle is dynamic and thus passive. What do you mean by dynamic? It pertains to the changes in its structure or in its meaning. Okay, so however, you will see in chapter 20 that adjectives can sometimes be dynamic. Thus, in the end, in cases of ambiguity, the only distinguishing sentence level feature we are left with is the use of by with the noun phrase to mark an agent in the passive voice. Okay, so let's now discuss the next examples. So if there is one, for example, the beans were refried. So we can also add it by someone to make it passive. But if you're only trying to make it as a present state of the beans to make it adjective, then you will just say the beans were refried. Okay, so remember, by identifying the passive in a sentence or passive voice in a sentence, always look for the word by, because that will automatically clear your mind that the sentence you are reading is an example of passive voice. Okay, so we also have here another example. The suspect was alleged to have taken the money, and then the second one, the alleged thief. So as you can observe, there is a difference between its pronunciation but the same in spelling. Why? It is because some adjectives can also have its origin. Okay, remember that. So the suspect was alleged to have taken the money, so we've used there the other term for alleged as what? As the passive. And then the second example will be called an adjective because it modifies what thief is. Okay, so the alleged thief. So this was confirmed by Dubinsky and Simango in 1996, who note that in Old English there were two distinct affixes that have merged into the modern spelling. So the same is true with also with these two examples. So the congregation was blessed. So if you're going to identify it as a verb being used in this sentence, you will just pronounce the word blessed into blessed. Okay, but if you're going to identify it as an adjective, then you are going to pronounce it as a or as blessed. Okay, so remember when talking about with its origin form, then we should always consider its pronunciation. So it differs from the pronunciation so that it becomes different in meaning. Okay. Okay, so let's now proceed to the middle voice. So I hope that you also know about this middle voice because some other students learning the ESL and EFL has no any particular awareness about this middle voice because they only know about the active and passive. Okay, so let's try to discuss what does this middle voice mean. Okay, so we hinted in the introduction to this chapter of the existence of a means besides the passive to put a non-adjunctive. Okay, when we say non-adjunctive, its symbol is NP. So it pertains to the subject position. So whether the subject is positioned in the first sentence, then it becomes the non-adjunctive. Okay, so there is in fact a middle voice. So what do you mean by middle voice? So in it intermediates between active and passive voice. So if you're going to identify if the sentence is using middle voice, then you can clearly understand it by means of its structure because it is simpler and it balances or intermediates the use of active and then the passive. So we can know this one because it allows the subject of a sentence to be non-adjunctive as in the passive voice, but the morphology of the verb to be in the active voice. So let's take a look. Let us take a look with these three examples. So first one, the example of active voice is that her high sea shattered the glass. Okay, so there is a particular non-adjunctive, right? So the non-adjunctive there is the high C. Okay, because it modifies, I mean, high C is being modified by this passive. I mean, okay, so let's proceed to this middle voice. So a lot of ESL and EFL learners, particularly the students in many institutions, they are only aware about the use of active and passive voice. But thankfully, we have here the lecture concerning about a middle voice. So what do you mean by this one? So if you're going to identify it, it intermediates between active and passive voices. Okay, in what ways? So the middle voice allows the subject of a sentence to be non-adjunctive as in the passive voice, but the morphology of the verb to be in the active voice. So we can truly know this one in these three examples. So first sentence, we have her high C shattered the glass. So by taking a look with this sentence, we can identify it as an active voice. Why? Because an active voice cannot does not use the word by, okay, or does not use the preposition by. But if you're going to identify it as a passive voice, then you will surely use the preposition by. Okay, just like the example. The glass was shattered by her high C. So in the first example, its difference is that in the first example, we do not use the preposition by because it is only active, right? But in the second one, we used the preposition by to make the sentence as a passive voice. Okay, so now, uh, let us now define what is the example of this middle voice. So we have the glass shattered. So as you can see, the sentence is shorter than the two first examples or sentences. So that would be the middle voice because it intermediates between active and passive voice. Okay? So, as Locke in 1996 puts in, English allows a representation of processes not only in terms of actions. So, in terms of actions, we refers it to the first and second first and second example, and the other. But if you're going to identify it as the middle voice, then it refers to the terms of happenings. So the only difference is that under the first and second example, we will focus on the terms of actions, but in the third example, we will focus on the terms of happenings. So that those are its differences. Now let's proceed to the three categories of ergative verbs. So we have three here. We have three categories of ergative verbs. First one, we have the verbs of cooking. Second one, verbs of physical movement. And third one is are the verbs that involve vehicles. Okay, so this is really simple to us, especially to those learners of ESL and EFL, because these are all common to many users. So first one, verbs of cooking. So in terms of this first category, we have different verbs to be used talking about cooking, right? So an example of those, an examples are bake, boil, cook, defrost, fry, roast, thicken, etc. And there are so many different examples of these verbs of cooking, right? So, as a sentence, we can say, I bake or I bake this cake or I baked this cake. So, meaning you are using the word bake just for the verbs of cooking. Okay, and the second category, we have the verbs of physical movement. So we can use move, rock, shake, spin, swim, turn, etc. So there are so many different verbs under this physical movement. And same is true with the third category. We have verbs that involve vehicles. So we will use drive, fly, park, reverse, run, sail, etc. Okay? So that's it. So since we've discussed about the ergative and its categories, let's now proceed to the use of the passive. So we can identify these examples below as an active versus passive. So the first use of the passive is that the passive is used when the agent is not to be mentioned because of these five reasons. First, we have it is redundant or easy to supply. Okay, so since this is um, mentioned, pineapples are grown in Hawaii, so these are really easy to supply because we everybody knows that in Hawaii pineapples are uh, fastly growing. Okay, so the second one, the passive is used when the target or when the agent is not to be mentioned because it is unknown. Okay? Why is it that it is unknown? It is because of the example below. The bank was robbed yesterday. So since the bank there is not identified as certainly, then we cannot truly identify, or we cannot be certain about what particular bank it is, right? Because it is only using the word bank, which is a very common noun in this sentence. Okay? So what I'm trying to say here is that if you use the common noun in the sentence, meaning the passive there is, meaning uh, the agent there is really unknown. Okay? So the third one, the passive is used when the agent is not to be mentioned because it is very general. Yeah, it is very, very general. It is excerpt from the examples of Hayes in 1992. So the why it is very general, because it is the opposite of being certain. I mean being specific, right? So one example is that by the end of the 1960s, the United States could no longer be described as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. So why is it that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation is under this example? It is because since it is saying that it is very general, then we can identify we can refer this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation in so many white people, right? It is not only the United States who are white in terms of its skin, but also some different um, European nations. Okay, so since it is saying that it is general, then you can just truly relate it or refer it to those different nations. Okay, the fourth one is that the passive is used when the agent is not to be mentioned because the speaker or writer is being tactful. So one example is Margaret was given some bad advice about selecting courses. Yeah, selecting courses. So when we talk about being tactful, you are not to be easily swayed by someone by just saying that, oh, don't do this because you may fall into this trap. Okay, so since you have your own principle, then you will just listen but not to do it. So okay, so just like whenever you are trying to pursue your dreams to become a policeman, and then someone would say bad um, advice about your chosen craft, then you will never listen to them, but you will just put it on your mind and never do so. Okay, because you have your own principle in believing so and so. Okay, the last one, the passive is used when the agent is not to be mentioned because the speaker is being evasive. Okay, one example is an error was made in the budget. So we become evasive because of the stated word there that the error was made in the budget. Okay, so let us now proceed to the second use of the passive. Okay, so the passive is used when non-agent is more closely related than the agent to the theme of the text, and that is what it is about. Okay, so it is clearly stated here in the example that I was much respected by the management. We can identify the non-agent as the I. Why? Because it is closely related than the second one or than the agent. Okay, so when trying to identify where is the agent in this sentence, we may identify it as the management. So it is being compared to each other, right? So for example, I am the employee, and then the whole management is my uh, rival. So I myself as an employee is being respected than the management. Okay, so that is what really this sentence is trying to portray or to convey. And then the third use of passive is that the passive is used when a non-agent is a participant in the immediately preceding sentence. Okay, so what do you mean by immediately preceding sentence? It talks about with the what? It talks about with the indirect object in a sentence. So just like the example below. France at that time was ruled by an Italian. So we can identify France as the direct object, and then the Italian there will be the indirect object. So therefore, there the immediately preceding sentence is the Italian. Okay? And then the non-agent there is the France or the subject of this sentence. So we are now done in discussing about the uses of passive. Okay, so let's proceed now to the agented passives. So agented passives are used based on these three categories. First one, when the agent is new information, just like the example. While Jill was walking down the street, her purse was snatched by a young man. So, why is it that this young man is a new information? It is because um, uh, in the mindset of any people or most of the people in this world, we identify bad people, for example, as snatcher. We identify bad people as those adult individual, right? We never uh, we never came to think about there is a young man who is doing this such and such, which is bad, right? So therefore it is said that when the agent is new information or new to you or alien to you, then you can now say that it is an agented passives. Okay, so the second category is that when the agent is non-human. Okay, pag sinabi nating non-human, that is we expect agents to be human. So there must have a confusion with these ESL and EFL students when trying to identify where is the non-human in this sentence, or let's make it certain that the agented passives in this sentence is cannot be clearly identified. So when the target is non-human, that is we expect agents to be human. For example, all the lights and appliances in the Albertson household are switched on and off daily by this electric device. So um, this electric device the agent is the agent of this sentence. Why? Because it is not human like, right? It is just a particular device from the technology that is doing a particular um, a particular favor to a person, or it is being lessening the work of person. So meaning the use agented passive there is this electric device. Okay, and it is not also human, if you can see. So the third one and then the last agented passives, when the agent is a well-known personage and should be included as prepositional information. So one example is the Mona Lisa was painted by Da Vinci. Okay, so we are now using the agent uh, well-known personage here. So mostly some of the people are known, some of the people clearly know who is Leonardo da Vinci, right? So he is the only one, he is the one who painted this Mona Lisa portrait. Okay, so as you can see, when the agent is a well-known personage and should be included as prepositional information, we use also the preposition by there to identify where is the agented passage in this sentence. And the identified uh, the identified agented passive there will be a well-known individual or a well-known person. Okay, so we've known that Da Vinci or Leonardo da Vinci is very well known when it comes to paintings, specifically the paintings of Mona Lisa. Yeah. Okay, so I guess here comes the end of my report, and I hope that you've enjoyed listening to my voice, madam, and I love you so much. You're my favorite teacher ever since I was a college. So goodbye, and I love you. See you more on the next chapters of our master. Bye, ma'am. Thank you so much.